Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews Podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, and I'm joined today by some of my wonderful colleagues, starting with Shaunette, who is hosting us at his place for the first time.
Hello. Welcome. I'm sorry, it's usually not this messy. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too, and you may like to know the voice memo recording process does not pick up messiness, so
okay,
you can relax. And also here we have Patrick Belin. Patrick, how are you doing?
Oh, hi Ben. How is your sex life? No, please don't answer that. I'm doing
well, since you asked.
Sure.
By the way, I think that's a perfect a moment to announce that we're here today, as you know from the title of this podcast, to review The Disaster Artist, which is about the making of The Room. But before we get into all that, we have, for the first time ever, here with us Jim Newman. Jim, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm happy to be here. And this seems like a really comfortable setting for this, too.
It is. Comfort is important, and it's quiet, which is always a
as
good
long
thing.
as the elevator doesn't, go.
It adds character, it adds texture, I'm sure.
Can I just make a side comment? I would have to say that our new guest here has a very podcasty voice, actually. So I hope our audience agrees and appreciates it.
I hope they will. I know they will. Well, as I said, we just saw The Disaster Artist. It's opening day as we're recording this. We saw it over at Cinema 21, where Patrick and Mo and I actually saw The Room there recently. And, as you know, when we do this whole thing where we just see a movie and then go right into the podcast, I never prepare any questions. There's not really any time. So I'm just going to start with the simple one to give me time to think of something cooler down the road. Starting with you, Mo, what did you guys think of the movie?
I think the difference with me is that I in preparation for this, I actually am listening to The Disaster Artist on audiobook, and I'm most of the way through. I haven't yet finished it. My thoughts were that it feels like a very sanitized take on it, a much more conventional Hollywood narrative, a conventional 3-act structure. That's not to say it's bad, but it's different. I would recommend the book. It's well done, and it's an interesting story. As far as the movie goes, it was good. I think I had fun. I laughed. It's well put together. James Franco is having a fun time playing Tommy.
You can say that again.
And it's entertaining, and it touches on a lot of the themes of the book, while also kind of sanitizing Tommy Wiseau, which I will get into later. But it's interesting and it's fun and it's worth seeing.
Jim, what did you think?
I feel like I'm almost bordering on effusive praise for this movie because it made me feel really good while I was watching it, and part of the reason for that was that I was kind of in awe of James Franco, because I have an idea of how he performs in movies, and I think he often relies on his likability. I mean, that's one of his great traits, but in this movie he was slightly ominous. I don't think he cared in some way how he came across.
It's a lot closer to what he did in Spring Breakers than like
I haven't seen
Spider-Man or something.
Yeah, well, it's just a powerful, kind of ugly performance in a way, and I really got a lot of pleasure out of watching that.
Patrick, what about you?
I came away feeling like it was a pretty standard biopic type of movie. Of course, I'm a fan of The Room. I've seen it 3 times now, and I enjoy The Room. But of course, I watched it as someone interested in The Room and these characters. But I'm not so sure that it would be super interesting for people who have no familiarity or interest in The Room. You'd probably get more out of reading the book, I suppose. In terms of some deeper moral tale. But it was an enjoyable movie. I go with a four-star scale, and I gave this one 3 stars, which is not a bad thing at all. In terms of what the best part for me was I thought James Franco really did very well playing Wiseau. I don't know if that's how he really is, but it seemed really believable as far as acting goes. I didn't expect too much out of it, so I kind of expected it to be an enjoyable biopic, and that's what I got, a 3-star movie, and yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of the things you guys are saying are resonating with me. I mean, starting with, what you said, Mo. In a lot of ways, it's a sanitized version, and as you said, Patrick, it is a very standard biopic. And I think it's really interesting. You're absolutely right. I think about his performance, Jim, which is there is definitely an ugliness to it. And I was a little surprised by that at times, because if I mean, I'm a fan of The Room as well, a new fan, but a fan nonetheless. And watching the trailer for The Disaster Artist, I just thought, oh, he's so funny, he looks so hilarious. But there are some, slightly disturbing things that go on in the movie, and we'll get to that. But I just think it's interesting, the ugliness of the performance combined with the sanitized quality, of the story, because it is a standard biopic. It clicks along very smoothly, very clearly, without too much ambiguity. And I enjoyed the movie quite a bit, and I especially enjoyed the beginning when we're first seeing their friendship form, because I think those parts are hilarious. They're touching. They're just plain weird when he's climbing the ladder, on stage. I mean, I hope that happened in real life, because that was brilliant.
It's trying to recall that scene from the book, because that happens pretty early on. That's mostly what happened. I don't know if they got to him climbing the ladder, but it was definitely just him doing an over-the-top reading of Streetcar Named Desire, directed at no one in particular, just him saying the lines and screaming a lot.
I mean, I can well believe it, and I love that stuff. But at the same time, I think this movie had a fine line to walk. Because how do you sort of ride the roller coaster that is The Room, and entertain people and deal with some of the more unsavory stuff? And I feel like, James Franco has actually directed a surprising number of films. This isn't his first rodeo.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he is still an actor first and a director second. And I wonder if a more experienced director, a bolder director, would have been more, prepared to deal with some of the darker stuff, like the misogyny of The Room, because I felt that he didn't quite know how to handle it. But we'll get into that more. I want to get into more something that you guys brought up, which is that this is presented as a story of a friendship. It's a behind the scenes story, but it's also kind of a bromance, if you will. And I'm just curious, how did that aspect strike you guys? And did you think that was the right way to tell this story, the right focus for telling the story of The Room?
Well, just to clarify, because you said you're listening to the audiobook.
Yeah.
Does that come off in the audiobook as well? That it's a relationship between Tommy and Greg?
It's written by Greg Sestero. Oh. He co-wrote it, so it is about it. The book alternates chapters, so the odd-numbered chapters are about production of The Room, and the even-numbered chapters are about their friendship and their time together. So it is framed through that lens. It's a memoir.
I would have preferred if they structured the screenplay like that. That sounds more interesting to me.
It sounds more unusual, and I would have been curious to see how that would work.
Actually, when I was watching the movie, I was imagining the screenplay structured the way you just described it. So I'm surprised that they went with a straightforward approach.
I can. It makes sense to me. I can see that. It can be a little bit confusing for it. I think with a story this weird, you kind of got to approach it more conventional in terms of movies.
In terms of, because like it's so outlandish that you almost like have to pull back to like show like just how extraordinary Tommy Wiseau is.
And the other thing is that you do need Greg in the story, not just because of how much he's a part of the story, but he's he's the everyman. He's our window into Tommy's planet.
Sure.
But
Tommy.
it's also true that the relationship introduces the darkness in the way. I kept fearing for what was going to happen to Greg because
Sure, of course. Who could not?
I thought that Tommy was bordering malevolent, and as far as the Room, I am at a disadvantage because I've never seen it. But in this movie, I really got the joyous absurdity of what must be part of that plot for The Room. So I thought that it carried that pretty well, even though I have no experience. I haven't even talked to anyone about The Room. You know? I mean, you don't have to see I don't believe you have to see The Room to enjoy this movie.
That's good. We're speaking as people who have seen The Room, who are caught up with the I'm trying to find a word that isn't oeuvre, because that's gonna make me sound like an asshole. But
we know it well enough to get excited when he says hi doggy.
I want to see it. I mean, it makes me want to see it.
You got to do a group viewing. That's the only way to do it.
Well,
it's funny because I've watched it two ways. I watched it over at Cinema 21 with you guys, but the other day I found a version on YouTube, the whole movie with Spanish subtitles. And it was so weird and so strange that it was just there for free, but with Spanish subtitles. It's so a piece with the whole Tommy experience.
Yeah, but it's better when a story can be a story without necessarily requiring additional research. So I'm glad that worked out for you.
Yeah, it did. It did. I bought it and I enjoyed it. And I also, I don't know James Franco as a director, but I really liked the way the movie depicted L.A. I got a sense of happiness out of it, really. It felt like a really pleasant place to be, which made sense in the narrative of the story because it was Greg's first experience,
Well, it's very. You see the gaudiness and stuff, but it's very affectionate.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about over the years. I think different portraits of L.A., but this is not the L.A. of Drive, which is a symbol of anguish and isolation, and it's not the kind of sort of mytho-poetic, LA of something like La La Land. Like, this is kind of... It feels like it's meant to feel like the real place, It
is one where you can run into a TV star in the middle of a cafe, but
and he'd offer you a job.
And he'd offer you a job on the spot.
It does explain a lot for someone who's seen The Room a lot, and the scene where they take a road trip up to San Francisco. I always thought that scene didn't fit when they were in the park throwing football together. Mm-hmm. Because the Room, what makes the Room so great is that it has a very unique aesthetic, and that scene takes it.
That's a very good way of putting it.
They went through at least 3 directors of photography during the production of The Room.
Yeah, so it makes sense how they portray it in The Disaster Artist, and that it was not supposed to actually be there. They kind of like shoehorned it in.
Well, the funny thing, one thing I love about The Room is, I think someone analyzed it, and like the whole middle third of the movie has no effect on the overall plot.
It's just like loose ends.
Somewhere between Acts 2 and 5.
Right.
Oh my gosh! But going back to this issue of the friendship between Greg and Tommy. It's like. It's very strange, and I got a real chill when he's his mother's there, watching her son go off with this guy who looks like a total psychopath.
Right?
And it's really kind of like a miracle that he wasn't murdered on the way down to L.A. and left by the side of the road.
Exactly.
So I'm just curious, like what do you guys make of the way this friendship is depicted? Because it's oddly sweet. It's kind of scary, but either way, it's the spine of the movie. This is the angle they chose to tell this, what is essentially a making of story.
That felt true to the book, and I'm assuming that feels true to real life. The way they flesh out Greg more in the movie, I think, than in the book. Because in the movie, you get a sense of his insecurity, and you get a sense of his nervousness, and you believe that he would be taken in by someone like Tommy, that he would be mystified by him naturally, but also kind of curious enough to see, like, let's see where this goes. Let's follow through on this.
Well, and that's interesting because in the movie, like I'm glad to hear that they do that in the book, because in the movie I was almost like, do I quite believe that this guy would be taken in? Because Dave Franco seems a little too smart, but I don't know. Continue. Sorry.
That was it. They sort of rush through the first act. It feels like they're just kind of hitting the bullet points of Tommy and Greg's friendship. But the real meat of the story is production of The Room. So it seems like, I get them trying, like they definitely cut a lot of stuff out. The one thing that I think, this speaks to a different issue, and we'll get into that later, I'm sure, but the one thing is, like, they very much bring up Greg's girlfriend at the time, Amber, as sort of a source of conflicts between Tommy and Greg. And that, I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet, so I may be wrong, but it's the way Greg Sestero describes it in the book is that he was actually getting work in Hollywood. Not a lot of work, not really anything super significant, but he had a noted agent in Iris Burton who was famous for basically shepherding children actors to adulthood. And, like, he got the lead in Retro Puppet Master, which is a direct-to-DVD horror film that he filmed in Romania, but he was the lead in it, because he could do the entire part in a French accent. And he had a SAG card, and so Tommy Wiseau found out about that, and is like, so how do you get a SAG card? It's like, oh, you do this. One of the things was you be a featured extra, you be a featured player in a commercial. And so Tommy Wiseau, who apparently owned a company, made a commercial, starred in it, and got a SAG card that way. So it's like, that's the idea that it was more professional jealousy, that Tommy was kind of just taking acting classes in San Francisco while Greg Sestero moved to L.A. He was living in Tommy Wiseau's apartment in L.A., but he moved down there first. He was there trying to get work, and in some cases succeeding. That was a bigger point of friction between them.
But one question that I had from the beginning of the movie is, was there a physical attraction between those two guys? I mean, it seemed like from Greg's point of view, there definitely was not, I guess. But from Tommy's point of view, I mean, not that he was necessarily predatory, although that crossed my mind a lot of times, especially in that scene with the mom, where he drives off. She's crazy. I mean, that was ominous to me. Yeah. But I think he was a lonely guy who was attracted to Greg and was disappointed when it turned out that he was straight.
See, I was also, I couldn't help but armchair psychoanalyze Tommy as I was watching this movie. So I'm a bit divided. I'm not putting too much weight behind the latent homoerotic tendencies, but more so on this, I'm weighing more so on the side of a persecuted savior complex, I think. And which also hints at Tommy's background, in my opinion. Of course, nobody knows, but if I'm gonna pull a rabbit out of my hat, I would guess that he fled war-torn Europe as an illegal immigrant, and even Tommy Wiseau is probably not even his real name. It's fixed papers, which is why he doesn't want to talk about it. But anyways, I'm not gonna get too much into that. But if I were to really think about Tommy's character, there's definitely that persecuted savior complex, and he took Greg under his wing, kind of the same way someone took him under his wing. So that's how I kind of read Tommy's character.
It's funny. It reminds me of another movie with James Franco and Seth Rogen, which is This Is the End. Where of course you have all these actors portraying versions of themselves. In the lead roles, Seth Rogen and Jay Baruchel, and there is their friendship in the movie is portrayed as very platonic, but there's a real sense of betrayal when it's like, Seth's gone out to Hollywood, and they don't quite get along anymore, and Jay's mad, and Judd Apatow shows up in this movie. He was part of that whole thing, and
Seth Rogen too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think a theme in the whole Apatow, Rogen, Franco world is these friendships. They can be even if they're platonic, they can be very deep, and there can be a sense of betrayal, he has more than me. We're drifting apart, and it almost does have a romantic vibe because it's that intense. But it's interesting because even knowing that they're friends today, Tommy and Greg Sestero, I got wrapped up in this movie, and I did almost expect something terrible to happen, because it's the whole thing, Tommy picking up from his mom's house, has, and nobody knows how old he is,
Yeah.
There's it's a sinister vibe, he's that eager to move in with him. But it's if the movie is to be believed, I almost have to think that, Tommy is this, just this lonely guy, who wanted a friend. And it's funny, Greg sees him at the beginning as this almost larger than life, mystical theater, he's gonna save my career, he's gonna teach me how it's done. But the thing is, I don't obviously know Tommy's history, apparently none of us do, but you wonder if when Greg comes up to him, wants to do a scene with him, if that's the first time someone has approached Tommy like that, maybe ever, actually wanting to associate with him. And I thought that was very striking.
Because he's a needy guy, one way or the other. There's another aspect of this movie that I thought was pretty rich, and that was that it seemed also to be a comment on acting itself, because they kept bringing James Dean clips in, and in my opinion, James Dean overacted like crazy a lot of the time, just like Tommy does. You're tearing me apart, and so does Tommy in the movie. Just really goes over the top, and my age is telling here, because I recognized a former movie star in The Disaster Artist named Melanie Griffith. She plays...
Melanie Griffith was in there?
She was Gene Shelton, the acting teacher, right?
Yeah.
That was Melanie Griffith. Wow.
I was wondering.
That's pretty cool.
Was that? Okay.
She was funny, too.
Then I'm confusing the actresses then, but one actress shares that any day on stage or any day on a movie set trumps any other day in my life. And I thought that is really true of actors. No matter whether they do a good job or a bad job,
that was Jackie Weaver.
They love that. The actress?
Yeah.
Jackie Weaver in that scene. Yeah.
Good resemblance.
Yes, yeah. But that's really interesting. I mean, that's a fascinating kind of thing because it reminds me of something I said the other day. That sounds really arrogant when I put it like that. It reminds me of something I said, you know, but it's true. I was saying that, you know, like oftentimes after I see a bad movie, you know, I'll tell people it was bad, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and I always think, "No, don't be sorry," because I got to walk into a theater and look up at a giant screen and with a bunch of other people see, you know, a movie up there. Like I mean, the magic for me. It doesn't die, you know. Not even the Book of Henry and Pirates of the Caribbean 10,000 couldn't kill it. So, you know, I really related to that moment, and I think that moment speaks to, you know, why The Room is such a joyous phenomenon. Is it horrible? Yes, it's horrible, but it's so enjoyable.
It's also hilarious.
It is, and therefore
it's fucking hilarious.
It is, and therefore, is it really horrible? Because it may not have succeeded in the way Tommy Wiseau wanted, but it sure as hell succeeded. We wouldn't be watching it over a decade later if it didn't. And I think that's fascinating.
It's its own genre of comedy. I don't
Naive
know how.
surrealism.
I don't know how to replicate it.
Like you see them replicate. You see, like they do.
But see, you would be doing that on purpose, though.
But that's the point. Like you see them during the credits. You see like a shot by shot recreation where they have the original Room footage and then the actors in The Disaster Artist trying to replicate it. It doesn't work.
Yeah,
funny.
That's true. That's true.
It's definitely funny, but it's like you're putting on a performance. You're trying to imitate awkward delivery. You're not giving awkward delivery.
Exactly.
And
I think that's fascinating.
It's not there. Like the magic is not there.
Yeah, I kept looking at that footage, the side by side footage, and I would think things like, you know, oh gosh, you know, Lisa's hair isn't right. The angle of Mark's head is just not doing it, and it's funny. Like it's really crazy to think that James Franco, one of the most famous actors in America, if not the world, is trying to recreate what Tommy Wiseau did. You know,
and I mean, it's not there.
It's a blatant facsimile.
Well, not having seen The Room, I didn't notice the differences when they did those parallel scenes. I actually thought that it was a good imitation show. So that shows that at least on a superficial level, they really were trying to mimic. What they were doing. I mean, it was an homage, if we could use that word. They were loving it so much.
I think with us,
they tried.
It's just that we know these parts, these lines.
Yeah. It's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show back when people. Well, it was a ritualistic celebration every Saturday night, and it sounds like that's The Room now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of it's a really funny thing. I mean it's just fascinating to me. I mean The Room is so terrible, and yet like there's a sense that, you know, everybody wants a piece of Tommy. You know, James Franco, I don't think he would have done this movie had he not. Well, I mean, he wouldn't have done this movie had he not wanted to feel that, you know, to get to say those lines, to get to wear that wig, you know.
And there's definitely prosthetics on his face.
Yeah, and, which I gotta say, I'm so sensitive to prosthetics, and I feel like they fail so often. I mean, you guys can tell me what you think, but I thought these were pretty subtle. I thought they were pretty good.
It doesn't look exactly like Tommy Wiseau, but it's like it looks a little bit more normal. But it works. It helps sell the character.
It does,
especially when he's wearing sunglasses, which is something Tommy Wiseau does all the time, apparently.
I'm sure that it also really helped Franco get into character because he was really in that character.
Yeah. He sold that part beautifully. I did not expect him to be this good. I didn't.
No, he did really splendid work here. And I heard that he even stayed in character during the whole shoot. So I can only imagine what it was like to work with him. Hopefully not too much. Yeah.
I've been taking acting classes lately, and I did some scene work in one of the classes, and there is a real delight in sparking off another actor when everybody is in the scene and in some kind of magical way it's real. And I was getting that between James Franco and his brother, I thought, in some of their intense encounters, that they were having a hell of a great time doing that.
Oh yeah, you can tell they had a lot of fun, especially recreating the scenes.
Yeah. No, the chemistry feels real. It's a delight to watch, I think. But there's another thing I wanted to get in with you guys, and this is something that you promised we would get into, Mo. So we are delivering on that promise.
Go for it, man.
James Franco said it himself. You know, the room is grossly misogynistic. I mean, it is a to use this phrase again, persecuted savior movie about a guy who's so wonderful. Everybody love him, and then he gives his fiancée everything. He treats her like a princess, as he says himself. And then she betrays him, and the movie doesn't attempt to see like any nuance in her character. Totally demonizes her. The audience is supposed to be okay with that, and just be sad that oh, he was betrayed and then he died, blah blah blah. And it's one thing to make a misogynistic movie. There are a lot of misogynistic movies, even movies that don't mean to be. They end up being that way because, as we all know, that's systemic to the film business, as it is to arguably a lot of businesses, if not all. But we see in this movie, we also see that misogyny extends behind the scenes as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And some of that stuff is really stomach churning to watch. And yet the movie sticks with this sort of formula of it's ultimately a bromance. It's ultimately about dreams. It's ultimately about the love between these two guys who we know are still friends to this day from the end credits, as they say. So I mean, I feel there is as much as I enjoyed the movie, I feel there's a little bit of a disjunctive thing going on here where the kind of inspirational friendship story doesn't quite mesh with the unsavory stuff.
Right.
And so I just want to hear from you guys, like, do you agree or do you feel that the movie handles that well? I mean, I'm just curious how you reacted to that part of the movie.
I'm going to talk last because I'm going to talk about the book for a while. So someone else.
No, you should. I think you should because so that way you can clarify some basic facts. I suppose. I don't know. I'd like to hear your take actually.
Okay. I think this speaks to what I was talking about earlier. The larger issue of it very much seems like they're trying to rehabilitate Tommy Wiseau as a character. I haven't finished the book. I don't yet know how exactly it ends, but they talk a lot about Tommy Wiseau. In the movie, he's very much framed as he's this kind of childish guy who has a dream, and he wants to be a movie star, and he wants to act for a living, and he wants to be famous. The book that's there, but it's sort of he wants to construct Tommy's planet. He wants to construct a world where people love him and appreciate him and pay attention to him, and he wanted to do that by buying his way in. Again, he made his own commercial just so he could get a SAG card. He did all this work on the room, but he would not spend. He'd spend like thousands of dollars shooting scenes that again have no bearing on the plot. But he wouldn't.
So most of the movie,
but he wouldn't pay for basic needs. We see it in the movie. Like he won't pay for an air conditioner. He won't pay them for water. And one of the actresses ends up passing out from the heat of shooting on set that day. The two of the DPs left because he wouldn't meet their needs. He wouldn't hire another line producer because Greg Sestero was also, the movie leaves this out, Greg Sestero was originally just the line producer. and he ended up taking over the role of Mark because Tommy wanted that. He wouldn't bring in a generator to recharge equipment faster, and then lied about it. He was like, "No, I called the generator place, but they're all out of stock." And I was like, "No, you're lying to me. I know this." He was, and in his friendship with Greg Sestero, there was that toxicity and controlling behavior. At one point, he flipped out because Greg Sestero was talking to one of his friends about Tommy. Nothing in depth, but just this basics of like, yeah, I'm friends with this guy. He's kind of weird, but he's an actor. I'm living in his place, blah, blah, blah. And his friend was like, this guy is creepy. You need to get away from him. Tommy Wiseau found out about that and flipped out. And it's this paranoid, controlling behavior that was not only in his personal life, but on set. He wouldn't execute any ideas unless he thought they were his. And hopefully he's gotten better since then. I mean, if he and Greg Sestero are still friends, I assume so. But it definitely... the movie feels like it's trying to inform his behavior. It's triggered by outside forces, but the book doesn't really go into details because we don't know anything about Tommy Wiseau's personal life. So it's just... he was this petty tyrant on set.
But what are you saying about the misogyny part of it?
Really, not a whole lot. I kind of am going off tangent. That was definitely there on set. Just the way he treated his actresses. The scene where he sees like a pimple on one of the actresses' back and
exactly.
loudly yells, "We need makeup. This is hideous." That happened.
Wow. See, it's like they probably go into this more in the book, but I felt like the story wanted to get dark, but it pulled its punches, and I had a problem with that. I can imagine on an executive level, there's some really difficult creative decisions that had to be made about this movie. Did it want to really get into the meat of the really interesting bits of the making of the room, because if they do that and they get it too dark, there's that danger of kind of poo-pooing on this celebratory aspect of the cult status of the film itself, and how would that be taken? I felt like they were trying to kind of straddle both worlds here with this movie, and it was, like you said, disjunctive. It was a bit strange for me.
It's definitely trying to be a comedy first and foremost, but it's like you have to acknowledge like the absurdity is there and it's funny, but when you actually stop and think about it, it's like, oh, this was kind of hellish to make. Like again, two different directors of photography left the project because working with Tommy Wiseau was impossible. So
yeah, I'm under.
It is a bit tonally weird that like it's triumphant at the end. It's like, I guess it was worth it.
Right, exactly. I mean, they could have probably done a separate, like, 30-minute documentary on the cult status of the room. But I always got I didn't read the book, but I got the impression that the disaster artist was critical of the room.
This is another thing that the movie does. It's kind of, it paints it as Greg Sestero was on board the whole time. The book, he helped make it, but he was under no illusions that it was a good movie. Like, it's there in the script.
And he almost seemed like he did think it was good in this movie, in The Disaster Artist, which is...
No, like, no one on the crew for The Room thought it was a good movie except Tommy Wiseau. Everyone else was just like, okay, some rich weirdo is paying us to make his passion project. Let's do it, collect the check, and go home. And then they realized, oh no, my name's going to be attached to this. And then they realized, oh no, I can't work with this guy, and left. So it's... Again, it's a very sanitized version of the story based on my understanding of the book, which is also Greg's understanding of the book, so...
Yeah, I came into this with no preconception except my own value system, which thought, why would James Franco do a movie celebrating a loser who made a really bad film? You know, that was what I thought. But having left the theater now and thinking about it, I know why James Franco was in this movie, because it was a great part for him. It had a whole spectrum of different emotions. It had need, it had anger, it had quirkiness of various types, it had love in a certain sense. And I think that the character was portrayed as so dark that up until the end, when Greg at the end of the movie is still smiling, I was really afraid for the guy.
Yeah.
You know?
Same here. Well, and I mean, like, that kind of makes me wonder, you know, like, what if Paul Thomas Anderson directed this film? What if David O. Russell directed this film? You know, I mean, it's like, I thought about I thought about The Master watching this, you know, and I thought about the idea of a cult, not in the sense that The Room is a cult movie, but, you know, in the sense that Tommy Wiseau is a cult figure in another sense, you know, domineering, controlling, almost, you know, very mysterious. Almost seems like he lives in a whole different moral universe than everyone around them. And I feel like, you know, I mean, to go back again to the shots where they're replicating the room at the end and before the credits, you know, I feel like this movie, as opposed to trying to penetrate the room, you know, it's riding the coattails of the room,
Right.
and that's part of what makes it at times, I think, so enjoyable. But it also means, I think, that it's very hard to confront the more serious stuff, because this could have been a horror movie. It really could have.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, and it's.
I mean, they spend the entire movie talking about Tommy would make a great villain.
Yeah.
It's not far off from the truth.
Yeah. I mean, he is.
I thought they should have just rode with that angle. It would have made the film a lot more interesting for me.
The problem with making it a horror movie is that there is a way out. You can quit production. You'll lose some money, but you can quit. We know, because again,
You can't exactly do the
DVDs.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I want to speak again to this this misogyny that's in the room, and that, you know, we're seeing depicted in The Disaster Artist. You know, I think the scene that you mentioned with the pimple, where he's trying to get makeup in there, that's incredibly disturbing. And I think the scene that you also mentioned, where the actress playing the mother faints, I think that's also incredibly disturbing.
To his credit, Tommy was actually concerned for her well-being. The problem is that he was more concerned because he could probably be sued for liability.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah.
Oh man. But the thing is, like, and I appreciate that as a director. I don't think Franco was shying away from that. You know, he shows it. He gives you the space in the narrative to see what's going on.
I agree.
And allows you to be disturbed.
Yeah.
And so I certainly don't have a problem with, like, how those scenes are staged, because I think they're very honest about that. But I just think, you know, there's something deeper to be, you know, explored, you know, from, you know, the way, and the way he treats the character of Lisa and the script speaks to. And I think that I wish that, you know, the writers and Franco as a director would have dug into the misogyny a little bit more, because there is, you know, even though it's very honestly depicted in the moment, I feel like at the end there's a desire to sort of brush that aside, and to, you know, kind of, you know, let's roll with the whole, you know, cult following, you know, cult celebrity kind of thing, and just enjoy that and not think of the darker stuff in beneath. And you could argue that, you know, well, that's what the whole room experience is, but it is so on display in the actual movie in The Room. It is so blatant. Like there is no hiding from it. In a weird way, as horrible as that is to see, I almost think The Room, the original movie, is a little bit more honest about it, because it's like it's so in your face every moment.
It's honest without being aware of it, at least.
Yeah, which is good because it's so unguarded, you know. And I find that it's chilling, but it's very revealing. And I mean, you have to think that that's part of why The Room has endured, because yes, it's fun in a horrible way. But it's speaking to all this this stuff about male privilege and all these other issues in that box. I mean, it's a primal movie. He certainly didn't intend to, but he hit on some of the worst things about movies and some of the worst things about society.
So, are you saying that its very misogyny is one of the secrets of the success of The Room? Then, because if that's true, then I don't know. It puts The Disaster Artist as a movie at a real disadvantage if it's going to be making that kind of comment, because that is a very dark theme that I know they didn't want to introduce and try to interweave with the whole spectrum of emotion that is in the movie. That's
it's a good thing
pretty
that
heavy.
you bring up that question, because I want to kind of backtrack on what I said earlier. I kind of accused Franco of pulling his punches, but now that I have a second thought about it, maybe Franco was doing this on purpose. Like he's trying to ask the question, but having the audience form their own conclusions, their own moral conclusions on it. And that's he also. That's just what I'm going to say. Because if Franco did go with that angle 100%, I think there's always this danger of spoiling what The Room is as a cultural phenomenon and that experience. Because if you really push that way, I mean, also a likely scenario is Tommy Wiseau would probably sue James Franco.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. And I think this is such an important, issue and aspect of it to talk about, which is why I appreciate you, Jim, calling attention to it. That does put the movie at a disadvantage, which makes me think like this movie struggles with the thing that a lot of movies struggle with. It may be too soon. The Room is over a decade old, but really, in the grand scheme of things, that's not that much time. Mm-hmm. And I remember I saw the Oliver Stone George W. Bush biopic, W, and there's a real sense of incompleteness at the end of that movie. It feels like that movie did not, understand George W. Bush, because they made it while he was still in office. There wasn't.
Yeah, that was 2007, right?
08, yeah, it came out in 08, yeah. And so, and then the same thing, like, I love The Social Network. The Social Network is one of the most significant. Yeah, it's the opposite. Yeah, no, it's a brilliant film. But that film has a little bit of a sense of incompleteness at the end as well, in the sense that the Mark Zuckerberg film that's made in 30 years or 50, that might be a more revealing, more profound film. And you're right. I think Tommy Wiseau would have sued James Franco, because obviously he's very controlling.
He could easily claim defamation.
Yeah, which is why there was a motive of certainly a motive to more like roll with him, in this kind of thing. And give him that cameo. Which, by the way, the cameo was delightful, I thought. Well, but I think that as you said, Jim, the movie's kind of at a disadvantage, and like, I think that I think it's interesting what you said, Patrick. Like allowing the viewers to make their mind, and I think there's a lot of ways in which the film does do that, and certainly I think being honest about the ugliness does give the viewer that opportunity to look at that and judge Tommy for themselves. The issue, I think, where that starts to get a little bit complicated is I think the movie The Disaster Artist wants to sort of tie a bow on the whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you have even the celebrities at the beginning. Which how funny was it to see J.J.
Exactly.
Abrams there of all people, by the way? But you know,
it seemed inappropriate.
yeah, that was one of my least favorite parts because it seems like you don't want to smooth everything over too much, which is why I still say I want to see the Paul Thomas Anderson version that
Yeah, right?
gets into the freakiness of all this and just how damn weird the whole experience must have been.
I think it set the ball rolling and it set it off on the wrong foot the way they kicked it off. I had a major problem with the first act. I don't, anyways, but otherwise I still think it deserves 3 stars, but anyway.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was definitely a bump for me, and I admit I got worried. It broke the dream for me because I feel like you want everything in there to be fictional and not real people actually talking, because then it gets all again disjunctive.
That's a bonus material.
Yeah,
Like you buy the DVD of Disaster Artist and there's like a 30-minute making of, and that's where it should have gone.
sure. I am. I mean, well, let's talk about the ending for a sec. Let's go into it. Like, I mean, I thought it was a very well crafted moment when Greg says, look at these people, they're enjoying it. And then, once he sees they're enjoying it, Tommy comes out and says, thank you for enjoying my comedic movie. It was intentional, I mean, I thought that was very profound, and this idea of, success, but not in the way you intended. Apparently, Tommy says all this was intentional. The movie's supposed to be like this. And the cast doesn't agree, and I'm inclined to believe them. But just what starting with you, Jim, I want to hear from all of you. Like, what do you think about these ideas of unintentional success, and is that really success, and how the movie portrays all of that?
Well, I think that it's kind of a measure of James Franco's skill as a director that he was able to build the apparent disdain of the audience, that the audience is laughing at the movie, they're not really in the movie, and by extension that means that Tommy has failed, so he leaves the auditorium and he is really down. And so at that point James Franco has to do this transition to, in a very short time, go from this dismal depth that Tommy's in to glory. And it starts with the sound, where you can hear something happening inside the auditorium through the closed doors that doesn't sound like people hating a movie. And then he opens the door and he goes in, and it's glorious. I thought that was really well done. And given Tommy's character, the fact that he claims that was his intention seemed utterly congruent with who the man evidently is. But in real life, I think that man is probably pretty seriously damaged as a human being. And
why would you say that? What are you talking about?
And I wouldn't believe for a moment that he did it on purpose to be funny.
Well, and I love what you drew our attention to, which is the way the audience is reacting.
Yeah.
And I love how you go from, they're trying to go with it, they're trying to roll with it, and then they're like, oh God, this is so bad. And you see
still going.
Yeah, that line was so brilliant. Like she is in pain, physical pain, and then yet somehow that gives to kind of this ebullient laughter, and they're laughing at the movie, but in a way they're laughing with it. Which is kind of
as
the
it goes
secret.
on.
Yes.
They laugh more and more with the movie.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Yeah. What about you, Mo?
I mean, that's the end of the story. Is the movie succeeds, just not as how they expected. I think that there is something profound there about, I brought up this quote a few podcasts back, but I think it's a Joss Whedon quote that's art is not like a dog, art is not like a pet, art is like a child. Eventually it talks back to you. And it's this idea of you don't know how your art is going to affect people, but if it does, I mean, that's something. There's power to that. Not necessarily power, but there's value to that. And I think if that's the thesis of this movie, then it's an interesting way to get there. Yeah. It's the question of was it worth it? Was all the abuse these people suffered under Tommy Wiseau, is that worth the final product that is The Room? And the movie is successful in its own unconventional way, but that question still lingers. So, and I think that there's that ambiguity is hopefully intentional. Like they're trying to leave you with that question. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, it does. And what you said reminded me of something Seth Rogen said about The Room. He said, "I've seen The Room 10 times, and I've seen Citizen Kane 3 times." And, it makes you think. I mean, going to that question, was it worth it? Well, maybe it was. I've seen it twice now, as I mentioned. That's more than I've seen a lot of really, really good movies. I'm sorry to say, but that's more times than I've seen Inside Llewyn Davis. And I think Inside Llewyn Davis is wonderful, so...
On that note, I don't know if I want to yet say that this is, I don't want to use the word film, but as a piece of entertainment, I dare say that The Room is superior to Citizen Kane.
I would say that it is more entertaining than Citizen Kane.
That's why I said as a piece of entertainment. My jury's still out on the word film, but
as an experience.
I'll get to your question about the conclusion, but I want to make a comment about how you seem to have a really positive opinion of this movie, which is interesting because you said also that you've never seen The Room and you're not too familiar.
Right, absolutely.
You're not too familiar with the phenomenon. So
yeah.
While I was watching this movie, I kind of got the sense that the marketing angle that they were going for was to try to bring new people into this experience.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which I suppose is fair. I mean,
I saw The Room because, I wanted to see this.
Sure.
So it worked.
I have a feeling this movie will draw a lot of interest to The Room. And, when you actually watch The Room, you'd understand that it's a cult phenomenon and you'd write it that way and you'd probably have a good time. And if this is what that film is trying to do, then fair play. That's what they're trying to do. But for me, who's more interested in the deeper aspects, maybe that's why I found it lacking. But anyways, to go back to your original question about the conclusion, I didn't like it. I thought it was too clean. Yeah, you can't go, like I said earlier, they're kind of straddling two worlds with this movie, right? I mean, there's the making of The Room. And then there's The Room as what it is, as what we know it as a cult phenomenon. And I didn't appreciate them transitioning from that to that in a matter of 3 to 4 minutes. I felt like there was like 1 or 2 scenes missing in between there.
That one viewing.
It was just so weird how they just came to the conclusion that it was what it is. No, you need time to think about these kind of things.
Well, it's almost like that one viewing was used to tell the story of the entire
exactly.
It
struck me as excessively fictional. I see. This is a biopic. You gotta at least attempt at realism. But so I felt like the beginning was the first act was problematic. It was too long. It didn't have to be as much as it was, and I felt like they could have added more towards the end. But anyway, so that's another problem that I had with it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Like of course, thinking about this movie, I thought of Ed Wood, which I think has its own imperfections, but I was really struck by the way Tim Burton chose to end that film, which is at the premiere of Plan 9 from Outer Space. And, you don't see people's reactions to the movie. You don't know that, it's going to be dubbed by some people one of the worst films, if not the worst film ever made. I think the last thing you see is just Ed Wood happy because, hey, he made a movie, he got it done, and so like maybe something like that was, in order here, that might have been a way around what you're saying, Patrick, but or the issue you bring up. But I think it's interesting, and I still think I don't know that I can honestly call The Room a bad movie. It's like I get too much pleasure from it. I take too much joy, and I feel like this film tries to speak to that at the end, and with the reactions, I think does that very 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 eloquently. But it's a challenge. It's a fine line to walk, and I still think there's another movie, if not multiple more movies out there, about this whole thing.
This is a point I wanted to make too with you at some point, but remember when we saw it together? That was my third time. I didn't take it seriously at all the first time. Of course, I went along with it the second time, but I told you before we saw it the third time I was going to actually take it seriously and analyze it.
I was just thinking about that actually, yeah.
And it got me thinking a lot, and almost immediately I gave it a resounding 4 stars. How can you have a film done so terrible? And as I said earlier, it's like it exists in its own genre, that it's that unique, that I gave it a resounding 4 stars easily.
Even with the politics of the misogyny, didn't that?
Well, that's a different thing, right? I'm moralizing personally, but as a piece of entertainment,
okay.
I'm judging
For
it as
your
a piece
entertainment
Sure.
value, okay.
Of course, I don't like misogyny like any other liberal, but as a piece of entertainment, the way it was done, it has a very unique aesthetic that you don't find anywhere.
Anywhere, literally.
Yeah. Well, and I think
I feel that that's what audiences have attached to intuitively. Like they don't necessarily understand, but like in the Disaster Artist when they started laughing, that's intuition. That's a intuitive response.
It's an honest response. They're genuinely taking pleasure.
I was getting it. I totally got it.
It's extremely difficult to replicate that in a contrived fashion. You can write the best Saturday Night Live skit in 5 minutes, and if you can get people to laugh at that level for 5 minutes, that's solid gold. But if you can sustain that laughter for 2 hours, that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some silent movies seem to be that way to me. That some Laurel and Hardy stuff, or maybe Charlie Chaplin, but the other guys, Harold Lloyd, some of those guys seem to be able to build that kind of hilarity in the same way that I'm assuming The Room does.
Is very rare these days. It's very
rare.
That was very common in the black and white silent film era, Charlie Chaplin era and stuff like that. You watch like Charlie Chaplin movies, they're great.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
Charlie.
You don't get stuff like that anymore.
No. And it's funny, incidentally, Charlie Chaplin, another guy who wore many hats, including both star and director. but in a very different way than Tommy Wiseau. But I see what you mean when you say 4 stars, Patrick, because it's kind of like there's that theme music from The Room, like turn. Oh
my God! Lord of the Rings in San Francisco.
It's that every time that music comes in the movie, and it's just repeated over and over again until it becomes totally monotonous. I cringe, but I cringe in delight because it's funny that they thought it was a good idea to bring back that dumb as a bag of hammers theme back over and over again. So I'm taking pleasure in it.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
How can you not? And that's why I think I looked up The Room on Rotten Tomatoes today, and it has a rotten score. It's in the 20s, like some of the weaker DC comic superhero films. But, I don't go back and watch those films again. I can't bear to watch Suicide Squad. I'm not going to put myself through that hell. But, I'm going to watch The Room, several more times,
It's a
I
unique
imagine.
genre. You have to watch it within that lens.
Yes, yeah.
You cannot watch like a black comedy with a literal lens. It's going to be terrible.
Oh, yeah, of course not.
But that's the thing of it. The Room is a bad movie. That is the least interesting thing about it.
Yes, exactly.
It's I brought this term up earlier, but I forget who came up with this term, but it's naive surrealism. They've created
way to look at it.
They've created this weird dreamlike disconnect from reality, and they've done it on accident, and that's what makes it special. That's what makes stuff like Plan 9, like Birdemic, like all these other so bad it's good movies. That's what makes them land. Is this looking in? It's kind of, it's a lot of different things. It's flabbergasting that someone this cartoonishly inept got to make a movie.
That's a great way to put it.
But it's a look in. It's kind of a look into their minds. And it's a look into it's a trip to Tommy's planet.
Oh yeah, that's
this
how he
world,
views the world.
That's how he sees himself. It's that he is this perfectly decent guy who has a lot of friends and
Who's going to get a promotion.
who's going to get a promotion at work, who is just basically waiting on people to turn on him. And there's that sadness and that kind of creepiness to that, but just in terms of pure weirdness of The Room, it's like, yes, I want to go back and see this again. Yes, I want to know. I want to experience these little moments. These everything with Chris R. Everything with. I got the results of the test back. I definitely have breast cancer. Everything with "You're tearing me apart, Lisa." All these little moments that are just so unexpected and genuinely fascinating to look at.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up some great stuff, and I think this speaks to the fact that, we are all looking not just for originality in movies. We're looking for personality. We're looking.
There's personality.
Yeah, we're looking for movies by directors,
and we know because we see Tommy Wiseau's ass.
Well, we have, and I mean, it's like you think about the directors that I think all of us here, whether it's Christopher Nolan or Edgar Wright or Jim, a while back you and I were talking about Alejandro Iñárritu. All these are guys who they have got, they're inimitable to a certain degree. They've got a voice. They've got something that only they can do. Even if they're referencing other stuff, even if they're standing on the shoulders of other people, there's still something special about the way they do it. And Tommy Wiseau, and really the whole crew, because The Room is a product of many people, because apparently he had a pretty hard time directing and needed a lot of help from the script supervisor. But I mean, he hit on something unique. He hit on something inimitable, and that's why The Disaster Artist is being made. Because I think James Franco looked at this, he saw, there's something special about this. He was drawn to it like a lot of people are drawn to it.
Yeah.
I think it's about time to sign off, but do you guys have any final thoughts about the whole deal before we go?
I think one thing is the power of The Room, and to a lesser extent the power of The Disaster Artist, because not having seen The Room, I get what you guys are saying about its power, and the word genius comes to mind. And if Tommy Wiseau is not a genius, then I wonder, how did something genius turn up on the film he made? I mean, what happened? Was it just the cosmos?
I don't think genius is the correct term to use. I think it's more inspired. He's obviously creatively inspired, and he has his own vision. But if the film turned out to be genius, I would say it was an accidental genius.
Absolutely.
It's some sort of strange alchemy, I mean, it's some some magic happened, and that magic arguably happened because he had a lot of money and could do whatever the hell he wanted. I mean, it's like, very pure in its horrible, wonderful way.
There's the old expression, if you put 1,000 monkeys in front of 1,000 typewriters, eventually they're gonna write War and Peace, and it's this. I don't have any other word for it. It's movie magic. You don't you have an idea of how something's going to turn out, and then something unexpected happens. You change your your male co-star on the first day of shooting. You lose again 2 directors of photography. You film with 2 cameras and decide which one looks better at the end. You reshoot scenes, you do all these things, and somehow it all comes together and makes something truly unique and truly memorable. I mean, that movie came out 14 years ago and was probably going to be forgotten. But there were a bunch of comedians in LA who found it and it was like, you have to see this. And they built it up. And by 2009, people knew about it. People knew this movie. It made back its money. And you can't predict that. It's movie magic. I don't have any other words for it.
I think that sums it up well. Patrick, any final thoughts?
Well, before I get to my final thoughts, what you just characterized about it being discovered by comedians and things like that, that goes back to what I was saying earlier on how they needed to expand on the end a little bit more.
That I'm kind of okay with. You take it with a grain of salt, biopics, because biopics are not about accuracy; they're about ideas.
Sure.
We don't know Tommy Wiseau. I mean, no one knows Tommy Wiseau. We don't know the truth of Tommy Wiseau. We know the idea of Tommy Wiseau.
It's funny because the way they sort of preserved his mysticism, and kind of didn't try to dig into the questions of where he's from. In a strange way, it almost reminded me of the Joker in The Dark Knight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of like the way he enters is he's just standing on a streetcar or on a street corner. We don't know where he came from or anything. It was very much like and that's something I really appreciate about the disaster artist because it's the classic thing. You don't want the magician to tell you how he does the trick. And I think that was a very very good call. And even when I say I want a more hard hitting version of this movie, I don't want the complete cradle to grave biopic
Sure,
because
that's
that
fair,
would
that's a good
I don't want the whole myth spoiled in that way.
And it's probably not a very good story.
No, I would think so.
I mean, a little mystery is not a bad thing. If we never find out Tommy Wiseau's backstory, I'm fine with that. Just like we'll never know who invented Bitcoin or whatever, or what happened to
Death of the artist.
My final take on this is, if you're a fan of The Room, I don't know that you're really missing much with the disaster artist. I think my main takeaway with this was it was really cool seeing Franco's portrayal, which I thought was really well done. And it was pretty fun, but as a biopic, you probably would get more just reading the book.
All right. Well, thanks to all of you who tuned in and listened. If you like this podcast, and god damn it, why the hell wouldn't you? Please click thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. Again, I'm tweeting, so do follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews. And please check out all the great reviews and content we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. Once again, I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson. I'm here with Jim Newman, Shaunette, Patrick Belin, and from all of us here at T.H.O Movie Reviews, happy movie watching.